think the only philosophy behind this is having fun, and how like what's best than, you know, going from a war zone where you have people who are feeling unsafe, who are feeling, you know, really unhappy and feeling horrified of things. What's best than clowning around with them and having fun?
Is clowning worthwhile? Should we spend money on clowning? And I look at the show today and it's like, yes, this is a form of relief work. This is a good thing. I know that we are helping kids. I've been in hospitals where children were so shocked in the head, they couldn't speak. They wouldn't react to anything. We came, we did stuff, and the first time, they smiled, you know. And I read, whoa. We couldn't get them to do that in 2 months, and you guys came in 5 minutes, you know.
Yeah.
If you laugh, you have all your muscles going, and then you feel more relaxed. And then it's good for the heart, it's good for the mind, it's good for everything. It's good for the body. You feel you're more open, you're more accepting of the other. I mean, just try to laugh now and see it's different.
اليوم أحسن من امبارح. من كان في مسرحية امبارح، يعني كنا نلعب بالملعب كرة قدم.
If you're like me and you've been following the stories coming out of Europe about local attitudes towards refugees, Syrian refugees coming into Europe, you would be discouraged from the outside looking in, because you would not realize. Europeans probably already know this, but as Americans, we have gotten so much of the loudest voices on the issue of refugees are these extreme right-wing fascists, these white identitarians complaining about how all these refugees are Muslim men of fighting age, which is code for men whose dicks get hard for blonde girls. And basically, if you listen to the reactionary narrative, and I guess also a lot of the civic nationalists have a more a more politically correct narrative about refugees being an economic threat. You lose the perspective that the reason that there are so many migrants getting into Europe is because there's a lot of public support for compassionate, a compassion for asylum seekers. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm still getting over something. But yeah, you start to kind of lose track of where the average person is. I think that happens in America when people look from the outside and sort of perceive what the general American's opinion on gun rights is. They're listening to the people who have the most money to purchase platforms. They're listening to an incredibly loud AstroTurf campaign. I think the majority of the guns in this country are owned by 2 or 3% of the population. So, we don't even really have a big constituency of gun owners per se, meaning that the average person has a bunch of guns. We just have a tiny, tiny minority of very fanatical, twisted, enabled people that are buying dozens and potentially hundreds of guns because they've been fed this propaganda. But back to refugees. So the average on the street European supports asylum seekers, supports these largely children and women that are coming from these conflict situations. The people that are freaking out about it were freaking out about these issues long before there were asylum seekers. They've always fed a narrative of impending Islamophobia. It's like the narrative of the race war in the United States that's been going since before the Civil War. The idea that blacks are going to take bloody revenge on white people, or are already in the process of taking bloody revenge on white people. That day never came. Killmonger Day never came. The U.S. black population is, if anything, under assault from the white population in terms of, in the public space. It's much less safe for a black person to walk through a white neighborhood than for a white person to walk through a black neighborhood. And I would say that this is the case too of these refugees. These Syrian refugees are much more at risk in Europe as refugees, walking down the street of a white European neighborhood, that then these imaginary no-go zones where little blonde girls are being abducted by Muslim rape gangs in mass quantity. All the little girls of Britain are missing from their home, according to people like Brittany Pettibone or Lauren Southern. I would say that refugees are going from one tragic situation to another, and the majority of people on the street, mainstream Europeans, are largely willing to tolerate. Maybe it's not acceptance, but willing to tolerate refugees, whereas the small corner of the right wing that is extremely poisonous is sort of adhering to these hard and fast narratives about who these migrants are, these asylum seekers. And I needed this story. I needed this story about Clowns Without Borders. It might seem like a kind of a trivial story. I needed some kind of a story to remind myself that the majority of human beings are compassionate and quiet. The reason the world seems like it's a really bad place is that people feel like they don't have to explain. No one screams at the top of their lungs the position of moderation. Those are just people that just keep their head down and go through life. But when it comes to hatred, hatred always seems to have a bullhorn. But I've been wanting to integrate more positive stories like this onto this channel because I feel like I myself in some way have not balanced out human interest stories that are about hatred with human interest stories that are about compassion. And I think my own perspective on this stuff got twisted because, I myself had become extremely pessimistic, badly depressed, discouraged, and just generally disillusioned with the human species. And it wasn't just this one story, but this story was a turning point. This was like an upturn for me to go, well, if this small thing is going on, how many other small positive things can I find people doing for refugees? And additionally, how many stories can I find about refugees fully integrating, happily integrating, becoming productive members of their community? So I do want to cover more stories like that on this channel, and I just want other people in the movement. I know it's extremely depressing, bearing the horrors of what happens to these marginalized people in these within the power structures of the Western world. I know that it can seem like we are losing, but humanity is funny that way. The best and the worst of us are inconquerable. Humanity, as long as we exist, whether it's 100 years because we fucked up on climate change, or 1,000 years, 10,000 years, there will always be the good. There will always be compassionate people. There will always be humanity. They can't take that away from us. They can crush our movements. They can divest us and try to silence us. But the thing about the best and the worst of humanity is that there it is. As long as we're here, this struggle between the best and worst is going to exist. There are no winners, and if there are no winners, then there are no losers. So, the best prescription for that is to remain in a permanent, consistent state of rebellion against cruelty.